Nice to see everyone this Wednesday. Welcome to the community call for Regen Network. This week, we're going to do a little bit different, something a little bit different. And I think we may start, maybe doing alternate weeks or, just there's a lot moving. So we may keep with a weekly rhythm and just sort of alternate back and forth between the usual sort of report and then community conversation and more of a open forum discussion. This week, we wanted to create some space for a little bit of conversation specifically about the Regen Foundation approach to staking the community staking DAO allocations. So that's an agenda item that we'll start with. And Will Zoll, who's the president of the board over at the foundation, is going to walk us through some of his thoughts, and then people can sort of chime in. I'd also love to hear if there's other agenda items that people would like to cover and just kind of have conversation about. So this call won't be quite as much of a, us reporting to you. Will share a little bit. We'll have a conversation about that. And if people have other agenda items that they'd like to be sure to cover, having to do with Regen Network governance or tech questions, whatever it might be, please, by all means, just throw it up into the chat. And so we'll keep track of that and can kind of weave things in. So Will, how much time would you like to give everybody a preliminary overview of the proposal that you're sharing about the sort of approach to staking the community staking DAO allocation?
I think I'll probably be talking for somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes, and at that point we can transition to some discussion about it. I did use our template for these calls to have a little presentation.
Fantastic. Well, I will pass the baton over to you, Will, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this and to having a little bit of a conversation about it. And again, if people have other agenda items, please feel free to start populating up into the Zoom chat.
Okay, so here we are. Let's see. So at the big picture level, the community staking DAOs came about because we want to extend network governance to participants that weren't able to participate in the token sale. That could be farmers that don't have the money to buy tokens. It could be researchers, could be developers, and even rights of nature projects. So at a big picture, there's this 30 million regen token pool out of the, now we have kind of a 1.1 million token supply that's set aside for this purpose. And we just hired an executive director, Revathi, and she is hard at work getting DAOs off the ground right now. So we should have more to announce soon on some of the first community staking DAOs. But in the interim, we need an asset management strategy for this 30 million pool, since it's by far the largest block of tokens in the network. So the current aim, but there's kind of a number of different things we're trying to balance here. The we want to have some kind of policy that factors in a number of different considerations, since it is going to have far-reaching effects, trying to delegate almost 30% of the tokens in the network. And so I've been working with a handful of people on this, compiling some research and putting together a proposal. In regard to the framework that we're using here, um, the key kind of culture we want to establish here is one where there is community participation in deciding how big decisions like this get made. So in that spirit, I have created a proposal, and the kind of the first step here is getting all of your contributions and comments and concerns heard over the next 2 weeks and integrated. And then we're looking to implement something somewhere about 3 weeks out from here. And also, even once we do implement something, we'll try it out, see how it's working, and we will be able to continue to iterate on that and improve on it. So the basic proposal is that um, we want to be staking around 5 million tokens a month over the course of the year. So that would be leaving 5 million remaining in order to use that to endow some of the initial DAOs. That would put us on a timeline of sometime roughly over the next 6 months, having delegated the 25 million tokens from this pool. There's two metrics that we're using right now. One of them is the ranking in the validator set, and the other is the commission. Within the ranking, the formula is essentially a bell curve, so that we, on the one hand, don't want to have, say 3 validators that control 33% of the stake. That would be a security risk to the network. So we don't want to too heavily weight validators up towards the top of the ranking. Alternately, we also want there to be access to the validator set, and to have people that aren't currently in the active validator set be able to get in. In order to do that, we can't stake too heavily on the validators that are down towards the bottom of the rankings. And kind of balanced with those other requirements, we also want there to be some degree of equity. We are currently anticipating delegating to all 50 validators in the set. Since it's such a large pool of tokens, we want something that kind of is as equitable as possible. And then the other factor here, which gets into commission, is the validator economics. And one of the that I guess there's from the kind of incentive design perspective, there are some considerations to think through. In Cosmos, there have been some validators for various reasons. Maybe they're self-staking in their fund, that they set 100% commission rates, and certainly the foundation wouldn't want to be delegating to validators that had extremely high commission rates. And conversely, we don't want to push commission rates too low. There's the current proposal on the table is to equalize for commission rate, so that a validator, basically validators are getting the same amount of tokens in their commission regardless of our delegation size. So that's how, so essentially, if you have a lower commission, that means we give you a larger stake so that your take is the same either way. That's the current proposal. And then the other consideration here is just kind of future aspects that we might integrate. That how does security tie into this? How does regeneration tie into this? Some validators are already thinking about ways that they can be building applications in the network that are tied into the mission of Regen. And that's certainly interesting to think through. And I'm sure there's a range of other considerations that we might weigh down the road. Then there's this forum post. That's the place where people should join in the conversation, in addition to chatting here right now. And please, any comments you would like to submit, please have them in by Tuesday, May 11th. And that's there are some other slides in the deck here that are here related to the roadmap and future calls. So maybe I'll just leave us. Well, I can stop the share for now and we can come back to it if we want. But yeah, I'd love to open it up to how that's landing for people, what thoughts you have. Yeah, thanks.
Will, I saw a comment from someone about excluding centralized exchanges that end up on our platform. Would that just be done, I mean, through the current proposal, if they set 100% commission, then that excludes them. But if, you know, like some of them on Cosmos don't set 100% commission, is there a thought of having some rule around excluding known centralized exchanges?
I mean, that hasn't been a criterion yet, but that's a great idea. So I'm glad that's in the forum, and I'll check it out after this.
Yeah, it's interesting to think through that, because there may be some of them that then come back and say, well, actually, we are contributing to the community. We're offering value. And, you know, so how do you do it in a way that's not just based on our ideals as community members, but actually based on merit? Yeah. So anyway, just, you don't have to answer that, but something to consider. And then I saw you say someone was concerned that the delegations would be permanent, you know, which could create this, like, especially when we expand from 50 validators to 75 or 100, then there could be this huge cliff right at 50, which is very difficult for someone to get past. But it sounds like your suggestion is that there would be a reconsideration from time to time to redelegate.
Yeah, so this is an iterative process. We want to do the first 5 million, see how it goes, and the intent being to continue to roll with that process. But certainly we are that with the example of they're definitely not permanent, and the if the validator set was expanded, then we'd include those other the other 25 validators joining the set, or whatever the number is. Yeah.
Cool. And then just to see if I've got this right, when a DAO is actually spun up and you actually have community members that will be managing a community staking DAO, can you explain what happens at that point in terms of these delegations?
Yeah, so at that point, the tokens are the DAO's assets and are out of foundation control. So the DAO will be able to delegate as they choose, participate with validators as they choose, use the staking rewards as they choose. So the point being here that going way back to our white paper, we established this pathway to decentralization, and the one of the fundamental goals here being getting the stake out of our hands and into the hands of all different community members. Yeah, so I guess I can't really make any guarantees about how DAOs, what policies they might adopt, aside from saying that every DAO we establish, it's going to be a group in the community that has a commitment to the mission of Regen Network.
Cool. That's great. And just for anyone who's listening or might be watching this video later, just a reminder that those 30 million tokens are kind of like a different class of regen tokens than the others, in that they have a permanent lock on them. So those DAOs will be taking control of them, but the one thing they can't do is to sell those tokens or transfer them to other parties. They can stake them, earn rewards, and those rewards are unlocked. And so they have the ability to sell those or use those as bounties or other things, but not the 30 million itself.
Yeah, we've kind of unofficially dubbed them like C regen or something like that, community regen. So they are kind of a different, slightly different asset class.
Cool. I love this governance feature of the Regen Ledger. It's cool. Some other folks have asked about, you know, how do you include people in a system where it's like one vote for token? It ends up becoming oligopolical, right? The idea that if you have more money, then you can have more votes. Well, I love the fact that this has been incorporated into Regen Ledger. Helps to at least partially address that concern.
All right. Well, if there aren't other sort of questions right now, please feel free to chime in on the forum. As Will noted, the foundation will be, is sort of like there's a request for comments here, and then um, Will. It was the 11th of May. Is that what you said when you'll be moving forward? So there's a couple of weeks right now to engage, ask questions, make suggestions, like Christian's suggestion, perhaps that, we have a policy around centralized exchanges as listings start to come online, etc., around the foundation. So those sorts of suggestions are very welcome, and they'll sort of be consideration, and then things will start to get executed on the 11th, the first sort of round, and then progressive rounds after that. So yeah, fantastic. I'm just checking the chat here to see if there's other agenda items. I know that there's been some continued conversation about if and when transfers should be enabled. So I'm not sure if anybody has opinions that they'd like to share around enabling transfers, and just thoughts on that. So happy to hear thoughts. And the other, let's see, so I'm trying to think back. There was a suggestion that, yeah, that IBC, there's also IBC enablement, right? And then in the not too distant future, and I don't think we're actually quite close, but there's a network upgrade to 043, and as well as some of the core feature set that we tested during testnets, but we didn't launch with. So just to sort of note that really over the next month or so, there are sort of several governance initiatives that are going to start bubbling up. So, and again, we have the governance sort of, I forget what it's called in discourse. In the discourse forum, there's a governance section, and separate category. Thanks, Dan. And so people can sort of chime in there. I've also heard some interesting proposals, and I've been thinking about some elements. There's been a long conversation inside of Regen Network and the larger Cosmos community as well around potentially implementing sort of a Georgist curve. And what I mean by that is there was an economist who Glenn Weil and the Radical Exchange folks take a lot of their inspiration from, and sort of this idea of quadratic funding and voting is sort of parallel with this guy. His last name is George, I forget his first name, this guy's work. And the idea being to sort of look for the optimal, for decentralized a decentralized secure network that is open and really engages in participation. Standard proof of stake mechanisms, as Christian was noting, can be sort of contraindicated because they tend, the more stake you have, the more easy it is to essentially win the lottery of a block reward as a validator. So you sort of accumulation accumulates, capital accumulates more capital. But we are governing a protocol, and we have control over the algorithm of distribution. And so there has been some conversations about what it would take to essentially sort of set an optimal cap for an address or validator, probably both, to have stake, where the capital efficiency is sort of set at a threshold where you can accumulate more than that, but it becomes less efficient over time, essentially. More and more less efficient the higher you accumulate. So anyway, there's been some internal conversations. I've seen some external conversations actually on Twitter and other places. So just a flag that conversations like that are also very welcome, and better sooner than later, as we start to, as a community, come together to make some of the adjustments to ensure that the, token economics are really sort of fitting our values and use case and are going to be attractive to really building the community we want. So I don't know if there's anybody has anything to add or if there's questions or comments there.
Patrick Gibbs and I were discussing a tangential topic yesterday and just looking at the challenges of in the blockchain space where we don't necessarily know people's identities, where we have addresses. When you create caps tied to an address or something like that, like, well, does it just incentivize people to create more addresses and have
Well,
their
that's the most common, yeah, this sort of Sybil attack. I think alongside this proposal goes the building out, not necessarily enforcement, because it's also important to have an open network, but being able to incentivize people claiming identities and sort of, so the optimal sort of algorithmic capital efficiency would be to have an identity that's been claimed and sort of like approved in a web of trust, and that has, sort of like peaks out at the most. So we set sort of like a maximum threshold beyond which you can still accumulate and engage, but it's just less efficient, right? So it incentivizes people to cooperate and encourage other people to engage, which is sort of the optimal game theory for network health, really. So instead of optimizing for sort of single player win, it's the network win. So you're right, Will. It has to come along with identity, but I don't think it's an enforced identity. I just think that's what we want to incentivize, is validators and people who are sort of taking responsibility. And there's also reasons why some people won't want to do that, and we need to be open to that as well. And that there's like a trade-off there, so sort of like creating the game theory so that trade-off is something that people can make the choice about. And I know, go ahead, Patrick.
So I've been looking around at validation and the validation economics on other chains. I haven't actually run the numbers on the Regen Network chain of like how much our validator commission is worth, because it's also, we don't actually know at this point. There's the private sale price, but looking, for example, at Solana, I see that there are validators on there who, based on the calculations, may be making like $1.5 million a month on validator commissions at the current price of Solana. And I'm trying to wrap my head around this and the sort of the social and economic implications of this. And on one hand, yes, like this is a strong incentive to people who are helping build a new financial system. And on the other hand, like if the idea is that running a validator is a job and people do their job well, does it make sense for $1.5 million to be going to a small group of people running a validator every month? I don't know. To me, and because I got into this thinking, okay, my validator is going to pay my bills and like pay me a wage, and then the excess is going to fund community organizations, indigenous organizations, and regeneration projects. I didn't get into this thinking like I'm going to have a yacht and like I'm going to have my satellite internet on my yacht and run my validator from that's just not where I'm at in life, and those aren't my values. So I'm trying to I only started getting into this in the last couple of days. So I'm trying to put this together in my mind of how does this all play out? And are we creating a new class of bankers when we were supposedly creating a financial system that was going to have different social implications? So this idea of making it so that so if there's 50 validators, if you've got 2% of the voting power, great, you can earn 100% of the rewards. of the commission, validator commission. This is like another explanation of the thing Gregory just explained. But if you're at 5% voting power, you now have more than double sort of the even share of voting power. So perhaps beyond 5%, commission rewards start to drop off. And somebody who's at 10%, like on their first 2%, they're making 100% commission. On their 2 through 5%, they're making 75% commission, and then it starts to drop off. Something like that is what I understand from what Gregory was saying, of how do we put this in practice, so that obviously running a validator needs to be financially sustainable, but does running a validator need to be like, okay, now I have $1.5 million a month? Like, who's and am I accounting for that? And then if you say, okay, great, well, I'm going to run a validator, and because what I was thinking is, okay, great, we'll create a foundation. The foundation will own the validator. We'll run the validator knowing that the money is going to the purposes of that foundation. But then I have to start proving that in a way, because like what we're saying of how do we prove that somebody's running a secure validator? And that's, there are some posts about that in the forum thread. So how do we prove, like if I tell you, great, my validator commission is going to do regeneration and funding community projects, but how am I going to put the Ecuadorian banking system financial data on the blockchain? Like, I don't know. The world isn't on a blockchain, so anyways, I don't have a coherent answer yet, but these are things I'm thinking about and that I'm curious about in this space.
Yeah. I think it's a good conversation. I'm just checking in with yeah. So I think there's some really interesting opportunities. I think there's one of the ideas behind the community staking DAO is to align, as we've said, sort of stakeholders who would conventionally be excluded from block rewards to be included in block rewards, and the incentive and participation in governance. I think there's also a way that there's informal ways for us to commit our, for instance, our block rewards to regenerative projects, especially as we start to bring online the credit module and we bring online COSM, and other functionality, so we can start actually kind of creating this programmatic approach to funding public goods. I think there's a way in which, validators hopefully will start in a way kind of competing with one another to be funding the regeneration that we want to see happen, and to be tokenizing that regeneration so that it itself creates a virtuous cycle. So we do want to see sort of a positive economic interest. We want to align economic interest with ecological and social regeneration, right? Ideally, we want to optimize so that profit and reinvestment of profit is really firmly aligned with ecological health. And the nice thing about being able to govern our own game theory and token mechanics is we can iterate and we can experiment on doing that, so that profit is not how well are you able to externalize costs and take advantage of particular economic conditions. Instead, it is a reflection of how well you can cooperate with a group of people and encourage ecological regeneration and social health. So micro experimentation around that. So validators setting up and saying, I'm going to start putting, 5% of my block rewards aside, and then I'm going to use them to, to sort of spin up some other project in which they're, being used to either to fund credit generation, or, I think there's a lot of different interesting things, especially as we start to get derivative functionality and other elements where we can start getting really creative. So I think there's like a meta community question here around where we would like what's the optimal decentralization and participation threshold, and how do we want to tune our parameters and our sort of like staking logic so that we are upholding our like the ideal scenario in the token economics. And then there's also a lot of choice and agency, I think, for individual validators, and I think it can be fun and even competitive. So validators can say, like, I'm choosing to, you know, sort of pay it forward in the following way. So just noticing we're up at the top of the hour here. So I myself have a hard stop. So I'm gonna say goodbye, and just thanks to everybody for tuning in, and a good conversation. Chime in if you've got questions or ideas in relationship to Will's proposal about the foundation delegations for the community staking DAO specifically. And Patrick, thanks for your inputs and thoughts. Ciao, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.